Community Climate Action Funding, advice and guidance for strands 3 to 5. This includes food and waste, shopping and recycling, local climate environmental action. It is presented by Aoife Munn. Hello and welcome. My name is Aoife Munn. I'm a horticulturist and environmentalist, and this evening I'll be talking you through 3 strands that you will need to address when applying for the Community Climate Action Fund. First of all, we want to look at what does climate change look like in Ireland? Well, over the last number of years, rainfall in Ireland has increased by 5%. This is 5% overall, but what we found is that it's not even across the board. Some counties have increased by 8% or more, and some by less. So rainfall increases have had a huge effect on us. They've increased the flooding, the threat to food security, and caused a lot of problems in local communities. We've also had 49 droughts. This affects health, food security, and biodiversity. Average temperatures have increased by 0.5% already, and again, this has knock-on effects on health, biodiversity, and food security. A further increase in population of by 10% has also increased all these risks as well. So tonight we're going to look at things we can do in our communities to help alleviate the effects of climate change and help prevent further problems. So the 5 strands of this funding are community and energy, travel, food and waste, shopping and recycling, and local climate and environmental action. Strands 1 and 2, the community and energy and travel, are dealt with in a separate video. This one will concentrate on the last 3. First of all, when putting in your application, we would like you to consider who you are going to do the projects with. This is a Community Climate Action Fund. In that, we're hoping that communities will come together to put in for this. Obviously, there will be a geographical spread of the allocation of funds. So if your town has 4 or 5 different groups putting in for funding, they won't all get the funding. They will be competing directly against each other. If you can come together to build an application together, you will have a more inclusive project. You will also reduce the competition for the funds. So other groups in your area who may be putting in for this funding would include tidy towns, residents groups, Men's Shed, The Wheel. There could be a number of groups that would be worth contacting. If you're unsure who to contact in your local area, please ask your local PPN, who will be happy to advise you of other groups in your area. Once you've done that and established who you're going to go into with this, you might think about who will take the lead on the project. So perhaps the group that has the biggest amount of projects or highest value of projects might do it. What local groups already do these projects? So perhaps the tidy towns in your area weren't thinking of putting in for it, but if you were looking for solar panels for a community centre, tidy towns might be a really great group to tie with because they already do a lot of environmental projects in the area, and that could help enhance your application. So think about who you should collaborate with before you start putting in your application. The more people in your community that you can include, the better. The more different groups, the more different individuals, and the more people who are part of this, the more sustainable community you'll be building together. So building the sustainable community you want means brainstorming to find the best ideas in the community. The more people involved in this, again, the better your application will be. Discover what is needed most in your area. By this, we mean that perhaps there's 2 or 3 buildings that would benefit from solar panels. However, under this grant, you won't be able to get solar panels for that many buildings. So you might sit down together, discuss it, and figure out which of those buildings would be the best one for the community as a whole to start with. You can always put in for other funding or funding under another stream later for other buildings. But for this application, narrow it down and pick the best option for your community right now. Try to put in an application that covers as many of the strands as possible. So you may not hit all 5, but you'll need to hit at least 2, and the more that you hit, the stronger your application will be. Build a lovely, inclusive, sustainable community. So the real benefits of this are not just the environmental benefits, but the benefits of building a sustainable community means a more connected community, lower poverty levels, and a more inclusive community. These are things that everybody wants as part of their community. So do think of the additional benefits that applying for funding like this and building a sustainable community brings. Also, we wanted to look at costly versus zero costing ideas. So to strengthen your application further, you can include some zero costing ideas. An example of this might be water butts. For example, you might be getting 5 water butts for your community areas to help water the beds of pollinator planting you're putting in. They may be put in by your local Men's Shed. If you could open this up to the community and say, would anybody else like a water butt at cost price? You could then buy 20 water butts instead of the 5 you were going to, and then have a deal with the men's shed that they put them in for these groups as well, or for these individuals as well. This would mean then that there's no cost involved in this with regard to the application. You'll only be looking for the cost of the 5 for the community areas. And the other people would pay for their water butts, but they would get reduced price water butts, which would then come in and help create a more sustainable community overall. So they're getting them at reduced price and perhaps the help of the men's shed putting them in. So the first one that we're going to tackle is the food and waste. We want to look at reducing your food waste, reducing packaging on your food, reducing the impact of food waste, and increased food security and reduced food miles. So a fantastic idea that's been set up in other community areas, look at the Clonmany Community Centre for an example, is to set up a community pantry or fridge. In these instances, often food is donated from businesses and local shops and stored at the community centre. If you have put in for solar panels for this community centre, this will greatly reduce the cost of running a community fridge and pantry. So you'd have the fridges there, the food would be donated, and you would have a set time, and perhaps different people would come and pick it up. You might have a Facebook page, and some people have fill your bag for €5, and others have an annual fee that you put in to get this. The food is then redistributed throughout the community, reducing the amount of food waste. It also can help tackle food poverty because you can people who might be less well off can come and get food at a cheaper price as well. There are many examples of this around Ireland, and several communities have now set up community pantries and fridges. So do have a look at other examples to get some ideas on how to run it, because there are several different models out there and you have to pick the one that would suit your community best. This would be a great thing to put on your application for the food and waste section. So what you might be having is a community centre with solar panels, and you could justify that further by having a community pantry and fridge. Workshops. So again, going back to the example of having a community centre with solar panels, we would then like to see the community centre used as much as possible. While the cost of workshops are not directly covered by this funding, what you could have is that workshops run by local people on their area of expertise run in the community centre at very little cost, as there'll be very low running costs for the community centre. So you could have a reduce your food one, a food storage one, preserving foods, what to do with leftovers. Tap into that fantastic body of knowledge that will be there in your community areas for people to share and expand their knowledge with the other people in their community. These workshops can be, again, a zero costing idea that comes in on your application, and a huge benefit to those in your local community, and a lovely way of building a sustainable, inclusive community where you get to know each other much better. Food security and reducing air miles. So to make food more sustainable, we want to make it local. To make food local, we need to start by supporting local providers. So have you got anybody in your area already growing lovely food that is organic? And if so, what can you do to support them? So if you're a Tidy Towns or community group, can you advertise these local suppliers on your pages? Can you promote them? Can you work with them to make them even more sustainable, like by reducing packaging, etc.? The more food that we get locally, the more sustainable it is. You can't get much more local than growing your own food. So again, encouraging people to grow their own. One of the best examples of this is a seed library. This can often be seen in local libraries around the country. Many libraries had started one in the last 2 to 3 years around the country. And if there isn't one in your own local library, maybe you could set one up. So the idea of this is that often when we buy seeds, they have a limited viability. So some seeds like lettuce might have a really long viability, but things like beans often go off really quickly and the following year won't come up. So if you have leftover seeds, you donate them to the seed library, and then other people can take those seeds and use them. And hopefully at the end of the season, they can harvest some seed to put back into the seed bank for themselves and other people the following year. So a seed bank encourages growing food locally and the sharing of food. It can also be used for plant swaps. And that might be done via a web page or a Facebook page where people can put up extra plants they have. So maybe they started the lettuce off by seed and they have more plants than they need. So they can put up the excess ones and people can post on it when they want one, and things can be shared that way. Setting up community gardens or allotments is a great way of increasing food security as well. The difference between community gardens and allotments is that in a community garden, you have several beds that are managed by everybody, and all the produce is just shared out among everybody. Allotments is where each person is given their own little section of land and they farm that and look after that to their own abilities and they harvest that themselves. In areas where there are very few gardens or where people don't generally have a lot of growing space, allotments can work really well. In places where there are a lot of gardens in most houses, then actually community gardens can be a fantastic way of sharing knowledge, sharing produce, and again, bringing people together to share seeds. Community gardens are excellent for even catering for a small number of people, perhaps living in apartments or in areas where there are no green areas for them to enjoy. Community gardens have been shown to increase satisfaction of living in an area because it increases the sense of community spirit and everybody gets involved. A community orchard is a little bit different. A community orchard is just about growing fruit trees mainly. And often people have come back and said, well, we can't put one in. We don't have a big enough area for it. But we can also have a community orchard that is dispersed. This is where maybe we buy 30, 40 fruit trees, but we don't plant them all in the one area. You might have 10 planted in one community area, another 5 or 6 in another one, and then planted the rest in another community area. So they can be dispersed across several geographical locations. This helps it be more accessible to more people because there'll be some local to nearly everyone, but it also helps when you are short of big land spaces that you make the most of small spaces. And that's something that we really want to see, particularly in urban areas. Under the shopping and recycling heading, we have found that people have struggled a little bit more to think of things to put in under this section of the application. So here are a few ideas that have worked really well for other community groups. So more local zero waste pages. For example, I live in Bray and there's zero waste Bray, and that's excellent. And when I put something up on that, it goes really quickly. However, I very rarely get anything from zero waste Bray because it is such a big network. There tends to be a few people watching it a lot and they take the stuff quite quickly. When you set up a more local page, so perhaps like we have one for the street in which I live, and when it's more local, you put something up on it and it takes longer to go. But the plus of that is if somebody posts something in the morning and I get home from work in the evening, I might still see it and it might still be available and I can pick it up. So my son's bike came from somebody in this community and it will go back to the community as soon as he's outgrown it. So having more local zero waste pages increases people's satisfaction because it tends to be spread over more people who benefit from it, and therefore people put into it more. So even setting up a new zero waste page in your local area can be really helpful. Eliminate or reduce single use in the community. Often people say single-use plastic, but I want to emphasize here it's not just about the plastic. To reduce or eliminate single use, what you do is you increase the price difference between somebody, say, bringing their own keep cup and using one that's a single use one. You could put on your application that you've approached all the businesses in the area and ask them all to increase the price difference between the two to make it much more sustainable. Some communities have set up an initiative where you can't get single-use cups. So every shop selling tea or coffee does have reusable cups you can buy, but you have to use those and there's no single-use option available. And that's a great way of reducing plastic in the area. There's a really big upside to this as well for those of you who are part of tidy towns and other community groups tidying up your area. The less single-use items you have in a community, the less litter you end up picking up. So it does help reduce littering as well. Swap shops. Different swap shops can be run throughout the year. And again, tying it back into the community centre, if your community centre has solar panels and different things and it's cheap to run, then you can set aside a little time each month to run a different swap shop. A great one we had locally here was at Halloween. There was a costume swap shop and children brought their costumes from last year and then swapped them for costumes they wanted this year. It was a really big success and it stopped things going to landfill as well as saving money and increasing satisfaction. So please do consider some swap shops as part of your application. You could do different swap shops under different headings for different times of year. So another nice one is doing perhaps one at a toy swap shop coming up to Christmas. Rumor has it that even Santa's doing secondhand now. So things can be picked up there and used again and again. This is creating a reuse culture and a zero waste culture. And by encouraging that in our community area, again, we just stop the things going to landfill and we create a much more sustainable community in which to live. Supporting zero waste shops. This is not just as an individual, but also a lot of zero waste shops open up and close down quite quickly because they're perceived as more expensive. They often aren't. If there's a zero waste shop in your area as a community group or tidy towns group, the best thing you can do is support them by going and shopping from them, but also by putting up posts on your page about them on a regular basis and promoting offers they have so that people are aware of the pricing and of how affordable it is and what a great benefit it is to their community. A lot of different groups have expressed an interest in repair cafes. Repair cafes are a very sustainable way of bringing in items that are broken and having them repaired rather than having them replaced. However, at the moment in Ireland, we are having great difficulty in finding insurance for repair cafes. There is no point in putting something on your application if you can't actually set it up because there is no insurance for it. An alternative to this that's been found by several communities is that they bring a fix-it shop, which is where the thing is not repaired for you, but you repair it yourself. So in other words, it's run more like a workshop and the insurance is easier to find for this. So everyone brings in the item they want to fix and they run it there and you each repair your own item. Community fridges and pages we've already put up about, and toy libraries, tool sharing, seed libraries. There's actually a fantastic example of this in Sandyford area. There's a lady who's been doing actually tool sharing for a number of years. In the community, everybody pays €1 to borrow the lawnmower, the strimmer, different items, and that money just goes into a pot for replacing items as they become worn out. This is brilliant if you particularly don't have a big shed and don't have lots of green space that you don't want to store all these items. And it's also great for stopping things going from to landfill. Often tools and equipment will rust down and be damaged prematurely because they're not stored correctly and also they're not used enough. So having these tool sharing areas in your community is a great way of reducing stuff going to landfill and also reducing costs for individuals. So as a horticulturist, of course, local climate and environmental action. This is my favourite section. So under this, we want to look at what we can do to reduce the effects of climate change. One of the first and possibly best known ideas is planting trees. When we plant trees, we have so many benefits. Benefits for biodiversity, carbon stores, creating habitats. And if we put these trees in a line and create a hedgerow, we have even more benefits. It has been found that if we have two green areas that are good for biodiversity and we connect them via a hedge, that we double the benefits of both. So by connecting areas, we allow wildlife to move from one area to another more freely. This means that they have a better gene pool and that they have a better survival rate and they do better. So the more hedgerows you can put into your community areas, the more benefits it will have. Another idea would be creating rain gardens. These deal with water where it falls and slow the movement of water so that water takes a longer time to reach the river. At the moment, the number of hard surfaces means that when it rains, we are sending a lot of water to the lowest point, the river, very quickly, and this can increase the chance of flooding. So a rain garden takes water from hard surfaces that would otherwise rush to the river and slows its movement down. So by the time it reaches the river, the chance of flooding has dissipated. So the next one is water butts and their management. So again, if you're putting in water butts, a second part to your application might be the management of them. So how do I manage water butts? Well, if I put in 10 water butts, I would also have a WhatsApp group for everybody who's managing them. If at the start of September, we have a very heavy rainfall event, after it, we had 3 or 4 dry days, a WhatsApp message would go around the group saying, please empty your rain butts now. We've had 3 or 4 dry days and we know that there'll be plenty of rain again before the summer, so we don't need to keep them full. By emptying them, what happens is that we allow capacity again for the next heavy rainfall event. So the next time we get a heavy rainfall, they'll refill instead of sending that water down the drain. Again, we can keep that water stored until we've had several dry days and then release it. At that point, the water that was from the heavy rainfall event will have dissipated and it will have less effect and it will definitely reduce the chance of flooding. If you're coming up to the time of year where you might be more likely to have need for this water in the water butts, let's say we're entering May, your water butt's full to the top, but you hear this heavy rain coming, rather than empty it completely, you might let out a quarter of the water or half the water and allow the capacity for the rain event rather than emptying it right to the bottom. And this again is just a good way of managing those water butts to help prevent flooding. Green roofs are another thing that people are putting up. Often if you're putting in a bike shed under your travel section, you might decide to put a green roof on it. If you're not putting a green roof on it, you might put a pipe down to a water butt and have a water butt there to manage as above. With a green roof, the only thing you need to consider is the load bearing capacity of the walls. When you put soil on a roof, and then you put plants on it and then it rains, though it holds an awful lot of water. And that's a really good thing for the environment, but you have to make sure that the structure is structurally sound and able to cope with that level of extra weight. So be sure of that before putting in any green moves. Setting up allotments is another way of a local climate action. This is also ties into the food one, of course, but setting up allotments or community gardens means that food is grown locally for local people and hopefully organically. And again, when you set up a community garden or an allotment, you would set it up as organic, of course, and then you're spreading that message throughout your community as well. And increasing green spaces. So this might mean that you have a concreted area. There is one project we're working on at the moment with a community group where there was an old road and it's now just a place where people drive up to and there's shops beside it. But the main road is now a couple of meters away from this old road. And so there's a huge big concrete area that really some people park on, but there's more space than they need there. And so we're running raised beds the length of it and putting in planting along there. So again, just because you have a built up concrete area doesn't mean you can't do planting. It might mean that you need to budget for planters or to remove the concrete or slabs in some places. But even just putting in the planters is an absolutely viable suggestion for these areas. And that increases green spaces and reduces the amount of water going down the drain again, because the water that falls on these beds will be taken up by the plants rather than draining to the old drainage system. The problem with the drainage system is that when water falls on a hard surface like a roof or a patio, it goes down the drain and into a pipe. Because pipes are a hard surface, the water moves really, really quickly through that pipe, and all the pipes are directed to the lowest point, the nearest waterway. So when we have a lot of built up areas, all the water from the built up areas, all the water from the roofs, from the patios, from every hard surface is sent down a drain, down a pipe really quickly to the river. And then the river will burst its banks and cause flooding along the sides of the river. So the drainage system is flawed as it stands. And what we want to do is to reduce the amount of water going into these pipes in the first place. And that helps prevent flooding. Rain and temperature increases will be the most significant effects of climate change for Ireland, and these are going to add to those problems of flooding. Planting trees stores carbons and lowers temperatures, which helps. And the more hard surfaces there are, the more water that goes down the drain. So the more we can avoid that, the better. So if you're putting in any paving or any community areas, make sure it's permeable. This means the water can sink through to the land below instead of being put down a drain. Flooding can only really be dealt with in areas that don't flood. The problem with flooding is that if you're in an area where you're worried about flooding, if you're a person who needs to worry about flooding, there's not a lot you can do. If you're someone who does not need to worry about flooding and rarely thinks of it, there are lots of things you can do to help prevent it. So this is why the Community Climate Action Grant is so great, is it gets us working together as a community, thinking together as a community, and planning out how we're going to improve our community for everyone. And this means looking at areas that wouldn't typically have to worry about flooding and seeing what you can do to help reduce flooding for those in flooding areas. A good example of this is a rain garden. A rain garden is an area that captures rainwater. It holds it. It takes it from a hard surface. This might be a roof, a road, paved area, and it holds that water in this green area temporarily. It doesn't keep a pond or anything like that. The most the water will be sitting on the top of this area is for about 24 hours, but usually it drains really quickly. So we build them on a flat area. We dig down into it and put some gravel in and keep it dipped and plant up on top of it. And this means that the water is then directed from the hard surface to this rain garden. And the plants will help take up some of the water, and the gravel below will help store the water. And the plants will take up as much as they can of the water. And then as the rain moves away, the water will move slowly through the roots, through the soil, back to the waterway. But it takes much longer than it would if it went down a drain. So by the time it reaches the waterway, the rainfall event has passed and the chance of flooding has passed. And we make our hard surfaces more sustainable by sending the water to a rain garden instead of down a drain. This is a cross-section view of a rain garden here. So as you can see, the downpipe is going towards this planted area instead of down the drain. The area is sunken with a lip on either side of it. This is to help it hold the water temporarily and give it a chance to sink into the soil. This is particularly important in summertime. Often we can have flooding in summer because the land is so hard that it's hard for the water to filter into it. by having these two little kind of areas either side to keep the water in. It allows the water more time to sit on the ground and slowly soak in, and can help prevent more serious flooding. Often in areas of heavy clay soil, we will dig out the soil and put gravel in and then a layer of soil and plant that up. If you have soil that's very free draining, you won't need to do this. You'll just remove a little bit of soil from the top to allow that dip there area to help hold the water. We plant a lot of evergreen plants into these rain gardens, and the reason for that is that evergreen plants take up water all year round. Deciduous trees, shrubs, and plants are not taking up water when they have no leaves, so they don't do as much to help take up water as an evergreen would at the times of high rainfall, like in wintertime. However, we never make just exclusively evergreen plants in here, because we also want to have our rain garden have other benefits, such as benefiting biodiversity and having an attractive look to it all year round. So by having a mixture of plants in here, even those that die back to the ground in winter, will have some benefits, particularly if they have a really good root structure. The roots going down into the soil will help slow down the movement of water and will aid the rain garden, perhaps not as much as an evergreen, but still they will do some. Also, plants with large leaves have been found to be very effective in rain garden because they hold the water in their leaves, and often it will evaporate back up into the skies without ever having touched the soil. Packing in your plants very closely as well, ignoring any plant distancing rules you've heard before, and packing them in more tightly helps them to, again, hold the water on their foliage and let a lot of it evaporate back up. So in this case, people often think that they're choosing plants that are like boggy conditions, but it's quite the opposite. Because we've made sure that we have really good drainage here, often we're looking for plants that are drought tolerant rather than plants that like water sitting on them, because it will be a very short time that there's water sitting on them, but there'll be a very long time, particularly if we've any droughts during the summer, there'll be a very long time where these plants will suffer, in particularly because they are in a very free draining area. So again, just to make sure that you also pick a flat area for your rain garden, because you don't want to send the water to somewhere that you shouldn't, someone else's house, or to an area that it wouldn't be appreciated. So again, we build it on a flat area and just direct and sink it and direct the water to it. So this is just a random picture of that I took from the internet. You can see the photo credit below, and it's just showing generally a community. And what I wanted to show is there's a whole row of houses here along the riverbank. And in these houses, there would be no point in putting in a rain garden, because you couldn't really slow the water from there to the river because it's right beside it. In addition to this, as the water level from the river rises, any flooding that's found in these areas is coming up from underneath. So adding additional drainage to the gardens wouldn't make any difference. The houses and the buildings that you're really trying to target with these rain gardens are the ones that are furthest from the river. Particularly if you had a farmhouse or something that had a lot of land around it, you wouldn't even need to put in an official rain garden. You wouldn't need to put in the extra drainage and all the extra plants. In fact, if you had a hedgerow running along the side of it, and it's a good long hedgerow, and you're putting the downpipe from a house, you're sending a small amount of water to a large area. You need to worry less about the planting and the drainage. But if the area is already free draining, you could just disconnect a couple of downpipes from these buildings. A lot of council business buildings are in isolated areas, and some of them are already investigating putting in rain gardens on their properties to show people how to do it. And these are great locations. They often have a good bit of grounds, and they're taking the runoff water from perhaps the car park and the building and dispersing it through their green areas. When you're taking the downpipe and redirecting that water, rather having the water all come out at one point, people often use seep pipes. These are pipes with little slits all the way along them, so that the water is seeping out in several locations instead of all coming to one point, which could cause a little bit of ponding. Other local climate and environmental actions you could get. One is a pocket forest. So obviously putting in a big forest would be more beneficial, but if you don't have the land for that, create pocket forests. You could create several pocket forests throughout your community. So this is any green space that you have that you're putting in a selection of trees. And again, even if you're doing this over a number of years, you can stagger the planting of trees, because we want to stagger the lifespan of the trees as well. And the more trees you're putting in every year, the better it is for the environment. So look around your area for some green areas that aren't being used, that could take some trees, and add pocket forests wherever you can. As we mentioned earlier, the benefits of hedgerows are incredible. for biodiversity, for carbon stores, for managing wildlife, for absorption of water. There's so many. And there's a great guide on Biodiversity Ireland with hedgerows, and I think it'll be put up below this talk as well. But I would add to that little bit, while the native mixed hedgerow is fantastic for biodiversity, and it is something that we want in there, particularly when you're looking at climate actions, I would urge you to add some evergreens to that. And the reason for this is that those evergreens are going to be taking up the water all year round, and they will help prevent flooding as well. So holly would be a really good one to put into your hedgerow in particular. If you want to put a yew hedge in, you can, but yew doesn't always mix well with some of the other hedgerow plants. So you might be just putting in a yew hedge with a native Irish yew hedge would be a fantastic addition to your area. Orchards. So we spoke about these earlier, and again, the orchards don't have to be all in one place. You can have a dispersed orchard, which will encourage use by more people. Pollinator strips. So we talked about how a hedgerow is fantastic because it connects two areas and allows biodiversity to move from one area to another. But there are two other ways that biodiversity moves, and the next one is a pollinator strip. So perhaps you might look at either rewilding or putting pollinator plants all along strips and creating areas that connect two different green areas together, and this will benefit biodiversity immensely. Bees, bats, birds, butterflies will fly along these pollinator strips and use them for navigation, but also use them to feed upon during the year. The third way we connect different areas is by raised canopy. This is basically where we have a row of trees along a road, and perhaps we've removed the lower branches because there's traffic and we need to allow vision in those areas for safety reasons. So again, having a raised canopy along those areas is another great addition. Swales are very like rain gardens, but they run alongside the road. They could be looked at for running alongside a pitch in areas as well, on pitches that aren't permeable. So again, they're going to take the surface water and deal with it where it falls. Carbon stores. So any plants that store carbon, soil, and not disturbing it as much, these will all help in your climate actions. So again, when you're putting in your application, think about what plants you're going to plant and list them. And the more that you can put in, the more carbon stores there are. Rain gardens we talked about already, and then avoiding hard surfaces. So if for some reason you do have to put in a hard surface, perhaps to make the area accessible or to allow use throughout the year, do think about what you're going to use for the paving and make sure it's permeable and it's going to let that water sink into the ground underneath and not be another surface going to contribute to flooding in the area. So finally, just to give you a little bit of application advice, build a sustainable community. This involves as many people as possible. Get as many opinions on what people want. Make sure that you've done as much consultation as you possibly can, and include as many groups as possible so that you're not competing against each other. You're working together to create a fabulous community that's sustainable and inclusive. Include some zero costing ideas to help strengthen the application. Show that you're not just there to get solar panels, you're there to really truly build a sustainable community and put in the effort that that requires. Again, including the number of volunteers and upping the number of volunteers will help you strengthen your application further. For each project that you put in, look at the additional benefits you can bring to the project. So although they might not all be climate actions, for example, if you're putting in a community garden, look at things like putting in a bench and encouraging people to use it and making sure that you have it open to as many people as possible, making it accessible. This will improve mental health. This will improve biodiversity. You can put in lots of different things in there, additional benefits. So some of the additional benefits you might be aiming for are chemical-free communities. So again, making sure that everything that you run is organic and setting it out as organic as you set it up. Native planting. So by putting in native planting, we are supporting biodiversity to the best of our ability. Heritage varieties help preserve our national heritage varieties of fruit trees by not just putting in an orchard, but selecting heritage varieties for those orchards. There's a lot of heritage varieties available out there, and you can look at places like Seed Savers to look at some more. Creation of habitats through hedgerows. So this might be the fact that you use joined up thinking. If we're putting in a hedgerow, can we take a foot or two back and leave 2 feet of long grass at the base of the hedgerows? And this creates a nesting place for biodiversity like bees. So again, just having those elements together, having a source of water and food for biodiversity in the same place as the hedgerow means that you make a much better habitat. Native managed areas. Often these are referred to as rewilded areas, but it's not a great term for it. Native managed areas are areas that we reduce the mowing on. So this could be once a year, it might be several times a year, depending on the uses needed for the community. But there's lots of ways of having different native managed areas in your community. So anywhere you can put them in, no matter how small, it's worth adding to it. And they will have the additional benefits of carbon storing, but also providing for biodiversity. Inclusive communities. So again, just making sure you reach out to other groups. So perhaps you're reaching out to local organizations, local groups that you wouldn't think of as environmental groups, but that will help make it more inclusive. Reduce poverty. So again, often with our aim is reducing food waste with things like a community pantry, but we can also help reduce poverty and other problems there as well. Reducing waste. And again, how we manage that waste as well. So that might be to increase the amount of composting in the area as well. So a sample application. I'm just going to go through this quickly and show you one that would be a very well-rounded and hitting all our targets. Is we might get a community centre with solar panels. We might have a bike shed outside this community centre, which is going to encourage people to travel to it by sustainable means. And we might put a green roof on this or take a downpipe from it and have a rain butt there. We might have a water station. Water stations are a fantastic addition and are eligible under this grant. And that would encourage people to have reusable bottles, bring it and fill it up. And they're particularly good outside sports centres where people often find a lot of discarded single-use plastic bottles. We run a food hub from the community centre. And maybe we have the men's shed installing the water butts and operating out of the community centre. So they're benefiting from it and adding to the system as well. A community garden on the grounds of the community centre. Perhaps you'd want a polytunnel for it, and that could go in under the application. Swap shops run monthly within the community centre. Rain gardens with downpipes sent to them from the community centre and water butts from it as well. So this would be a well-rounded application that hit all the different strands of this funding and would be a really strong one. And again, going back to the very start where we said the more people you involve, the more groups you work with, the less competition you have for the funding, and the more likely you are to be successful. Finally, I'd like to say that we really hope that you are successful. But if you aren't successful, please do contact your local council and see what we can do next. Often, one thing I would do if my application wasn't successful is I would ask the community officer, well, what was the difference between my application and the one that was successful in this area? What can I add to my application next year to make it better? Or often there's other funding in the area that's more suitable for your project. So often when an application comes in that isn't suitable for the funding, it isn't a waste of time because you'll be redirected to a different source of funding that is more applicable for what you're looking for your area. So it is always worthwhile putting in. It's a learning experience. And please remember that all of us are looking to support you in any way we can, from all the councils, everywhere. We really want you to be successful. We understand that most of these groups are volunteer basis, that they put their time and their energy into doing things that improve the whole community for all of us. So we're really grateful for that, and we wish you every luck with your application. We had a series of questions that came with this when we did it on the Zoom call, and I believe they're going to be answered and put in a separate area on this. Thank you very much for joining me. I really hope that you have every success with your application, and I wish you all the best with it. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.